All right. All right. Welcome everyone to Archive Management. My name is Katie Cheever. My email address at Triton College is on screen. If after this, if you have additional questions, feel free to email me. So I'm going to be going over generally what college archives are, what the arrangement, description, access, reference, and preservation information about archives. And then at the end, if you have any questions, we can do a Q&A. I also have some questions from some other people that emailed me that I can also go over if you all do not have any questions. So starting out, what are archives? So archives are institutions' memory, and it's the place where materials are located that tell the college's story, especially. These materials can be things like official documents, memos, meeting minutes, employee lists, and more, depending on what your institution has and what it finds valuable. Usually archives say that archives preserve materials of enduring value. So it's things that you'll want to keep so then you can remember events from the past. And along with that, usually the first step to creating an archive is creating a collection policy. So this goes over what the archives is going to keep. It is also a guideline, so if you get donations from people that aren't within your collection policy, you can either decline them or accept them. You can go out and talk to different people or departments in your college about what you want to be preserving. And it's a good thing to start out with. And if you already have archives and materials in your institution, creating a collection policy now is a great idea. Kind of looking over to see what kind of materials you have and then creating a policy about that. You can also update your policy depending on what kind of materials you eventually want to keep. And a lot of the archival work in colleges depends on how much resources you have. So if you have enough resources to, especially money resources, to hire an archivist or train your librarians on archives, or to even have a special room for the archives to get materials to like boxes to put the archives in. There's a big difference depending on how many resources you can provide for the archive. A lot of the things I'm going to go over are very basic, and if you don't have a lot of resources, it's a good starting point because a lot of archives is a profession. There's a big, there's a lot that's going on. It's like libraries. There's a lot going on in archives. And so doing one webinar about archives isn't going to cover every single little thing. So first we're going to talk about arrangement. So this is also the organization. This is how you organize your archives. In the archival world, it's called arrangement. So it differs from libraries, where libraries arrange things by like Library of Congress subject headings. Archives don't. They are usually not arranged by subject. If you have materials that are arranged by subject, like all your meeting minutes are together, just leave them there like that. It takes more time to rearrange an archive than it does just to keep it like it is. A lot of archives arrange their materials by the organization structure of the college. So for example, you could have a collection entitled Office of the President, or Academic Affairs, or Board of Trustees. And then within those collections, you can have series that go further detailing those collections. So for example, Board of Trustees, you could have a series for the board minutes. And then in that series, you could have files or subseries for the different years and the different board minutes. And then you can also have a series under Board of Trustees for the trustees themselves, information about them, different things they've done. All depends on what your college wants to preserve and what it has access to. Usually archives don't arrange down to the item level, which means rearranging pieces of paper into chronological order. They usually don't do that because it takes a lot of time to do that. And the one problem with archives is that there's not enough time to do most of the work. And it takes a while to arrange things down to the item level. So usually if it's not already arranged like that, you can just kind of leave it as is, as long as you can find the materials. A lot of people get confused with identifiers in archives. So they're similar to call numbers. They don't have a set rule for them. It's as long as you can find the materials. If you want to put numbers on your folders or your boxes or your file cabinets, whatever you want to do to make it easiest so you can find the materials. The thing about archives is that it is made to be accessed and used, and the easier you have it to find the file you want or the object you want, the easier it will be for people to want to come to you for information. Because archives exist to be used by users or researchers or patrons to be accessed. So that's arrangement. Next, we're going to talk briefly about description. So you might have heard the word finding aids and not really understood what that meant because it's not a very accessible term. Finding aids are similar to the catalog records in your library, where they kind of give you information about, well, instead of information about the specific book, finding aids have information about the collection. So like we were saying before, the Board of Trustees collection would have a finding aid, and that would have the title, which would be Board of Trustees, dates. It would have a brief description of the type of materials that are in the collection, and then it would also have container lists, which we get to in a bit. Finding aids are described through, they follow DACS, D-A-C-S, which is describing archives, a content standard. It is the standard for creating a finding aid, and you can actually find the PDF online. I'm going to give you some resources that are taken from the Society of American Archivists. If you just Google that, you can actually find their website pretty easily. They have all the information that you need, and some of the specific links I'm going to give you are for, there's one for guidelines for college and university archives, and they have more in-depth information about it. There's also an overview of archives. One of the links does have a annotated finding aid, so you kind of look over it. Most finding aids try to be 2 pages, because you don't want very long descriptions of everything. Otherwise, the finding aid is for the researcher usually, or for the archivist, but you don't want people to have to read through 6 pages of information just to find what they're looking for. So, depending on where you're at in your archive, if you're just starting out, you do not need to do a finding aid. If you want, because they take time, you can do them on Word to make it easier. You can also describe your materials through Excel. I've seen that done a lot, and it's useful for the moment. And so some of the things you can include in that are the titles, the dates, the descriptions, similar to your finding aids, and then also have restriction and access information. I will go into access in a little bit, and then if there's any restrictions on the collection, definitely indicate that so then people know if it's restricted or not. And an important thing is to have container lists, which is Usually archives are contained into folders and then in boxes. And so it's important to know exactly where your folders are. If your folders aren't in boxes, it's okay. If your folders are in file cabinets, as long as you have a location where it's like, this is file cabinet 1 and it is folder 5. I know exactly where to go, exactly where to find the information, and that's pretty much what you want with descriptions. You just want describing it generally about the collection, and then also making sure you know where the materials are. All right, so now we're going to go over access. So providing access is what most archives strive to do. Unlike libraries, though, they do not loan out items. If you are loaning out items in your college with any archival materials, I would suggest you stop. If you loan out items, they can be damaged and stolen. So in larger archives, you get reading rooms, which are pretty much just the place to go to look at archival materials. It's usually a closed off room. You usually have like a reference archivist there to go over policies with the researcher. I'll go over some of this with the reference section next as well. But you can actually Google reading room policies like for archives and find a lot of different ones. If you have a room for it, you should have a policy for what people can and can't do. Usually they do not allow food and drink in the room, and you usually do not allow more than like pencil, a paper, and maybe a laptop with the materials. And then for smaller colleges, a reading room isn't the most important, but you should have an access policy. So this goes over who can access materials, which is usually the public, or you can, say students and faculty and staff and board members and community members in your district, and then the general public. And then you, inside your access policy, should also mention restricted materials. So when someone donates materials to your archive or a department transfers materials, you usually need to ask them about restricted materials. So to backtrack a little bit, usually when someone donates, I don't know if you've heard of the term deed a gift, you usually have them fill out a deed a gift, which gives you donor information, and also goes over the copyright. So then they transfer the copyright over to the archive, and then you also have a section where you ask about any restricted materials. So restricted materials can be things like, I had some things restricted once that were had addresses of former students in a folder, and so it was former addresses and I think their phone numbers. Usually archives don't redact information, they just restrict it. I mean, it all depends on the archive and what they're willing to do. Some of that information, the researcher wouldn't need to see the actual paper if it's restricted. If they need like a person's name who was in the program, you can just find that yourself and then give it to them. Some information also might have social security numbers, which I believe after the person passes away, it doesn't matter anymore, but you still might want to restrict that just in case. But you also need to indicate either on your finding aid, or like I said, in your Excel document or in a Word document, and somewhere on the description of it in a note that these materials are restricted. So then you know and everyone else knows about that. So to move on to reference. So reference, it's kind of similar to archives, or it's kind of similar to libraries, sorry. Depending on the archives, most of them are by appointment. So not all archives are, I can walk in and ask for an item. I went to the Chicago Public Library, the Harold Washington Library downtown, and they have an archives there, and I walked in there when they opened and I requested an item. So there are archives that do allow walk-in, but a lot of them, especially the small colleges, do by appointment. But in my experience, a lot of the requests come mainly through email, phone, but phone is usually a transfer from either the reference desk or the circulation desk in the library. And I've had a couple of in-person. Usually in-person are faculty, staff members, or a student who's looking for information about the history. You should always, if you have someone come in, you should always have them look through access policies and sign off on things before looking through any documents. And then you provide them with the documents and kind of go over some preservation things with them. So like papers folders, if they're in boxes, should be taken out one at a time. When you're flipping papers in the folder, you do not lick your fingers before you flip the paper. Little things like that. Like I said, it depends on the size of the archive. Bigger archives have like book pillows to put books on, so then they don't get like, their spine doesn't get ruined. But for smaller archives, I haven't had someone come in to access it to look through anything yet. So, but your situation might be different. So what I find useful is scanning and sending documents. It's the safest, easiest, and usually, because most of the requests are through email, it's the way to go. If you have someone call in, just get their email and then tell them that you're going to email them the information if you find it. Also, depending on the request, sometimes it usually takes a couple of days for you to go find it, or depending on what you're doing. I always tell them it takes a couple of days. So it's a bit longer than a library reference question, but definitely giving it a few days is the best. So if you have a reading room, like I said, have them sign reading room and access policies, and then also you can also purchase lockers for them to put their items in. One I've been to had a coin operated locker where you put a quarter in and then you like lock it with a key and then you can unlock it. And then the desk just had quarters for me because I didn't have a quarter. So, you know, whatever works for you, works for you. I would suggest if you have a reading room, do not allow people to have their bags next to them because things have been stolen. So not from my archive, but even from like the National Archives, which is a big organization, has a lot of people there and have policies, but things have been stolen. So it's always good to make sure that people don't steal your things. All right, so next I'm gonna go over a very important, but very big and very technical topic, preservation. So for small colleges, preservation can be the hardest thing to implement because it involves a lot of resources and involves a lot of knowledge and it involves kind of going through your collection a little bit, especially if you already have things in folders and whatever you have them in. But like I said, I'll also get very, very technical. So for physical documents, I'm going to go over some digital documents in a bit. So for physical documents, they should be placed in acid-free folders, which you can purchase from, there are some archival retailers. Gaylord is a big one, and then Hollinger is a big one as well. They can be a little bit expensive depending on what you're trying to buy. But the basic thing you should do is folder everything in an acid-free folder because it will help. No matter what else you have it in, it will help preserve the items the best. Most archives store folders in boxes. If you do, the boxes should also be acid-free. But if you at least have acid-free folders, they can be stored in cabinets and it can preserve the items for longer. And if you don't know, this is why I can get technical because you can learn all about how paper is, how acidic paper is, and how different types of paper is different levels of acidity and what you need and pH levels, and it can get very technical. So when I say acid-free, there is like technical things attached to that. But if you go through retailers like Gaylord or Hollinger, and usually anything that says it's acid-free and archival quality, it should be good. Environmental conditions are also important. This is also one of the acid-free folders is easier to obtain, but the environmental conditions are a bit harder. Your conditions in your archive should maintain a temperature between 64 to 68 degrees and around 45% humidity. This is so it remains cold enough, not too cold, but cold enough to preserve the items. And then if the humidity is too low, especially paper can become very brittle. And then if it's too humid, you can start getting mold. So there's a nice little level you try to stick around. And if you have any room in your library that just is cold all the time, it's probably for the best. Also monitoring those conditions can help you see like over time, like the fluctuations in temperature. So for example, I will also work at, besides Triton, I also work at Moraine Valley Community College, and we moved the archives down into an old server room. And because it was an old server room, it always just was cold. And so it was a perfect place for the archives to go. But they don't maintain the temperature and humidity ranges I gave you, but I do monitor those to make sure they're at least like within so much of it. Let's see here. Now we're going to talk about paper clips and staples. So it's good to remove paper clips from papers. They rust after a while, and the rust makes stains, nice little paper clip stains. Usually they suggest removing staples, but it takes a long time to remove staples, and the staples don't rust as much. And so because it's so time consuming, it's not suggested to remove staples. Larger archives that have really good environmental conditions don't remove paper clips, because if your environmental conditions are the best they can be, the paper clips won't rust as fast. If you don't have the environmental conditions, at least if you find paper clips, just remove them. They're very easy to remove. For adhesives, don't tape papers together. There are actually, through some archival retailers, you can get archival mending tape, but do not put Scotch tape to repair a tear. If you have, it's fine. You cannot remove it because it will probably damage the material. But adhesives wear away after a while, and they stop being adhesive, and then they create stains too. So I don't know what kind of libraries you have, but if you have any books from like the 60s in your library, you might want to go over there and just like look at the binding and stuff. And there's any adhesive, it might have yellowed. And that happens to archives too, if you had adhesives on it. Don't place Post-it notes on the materials. If there are Post-it notes on the materials already that you got with the materials, you might want to leave it there because it might be important for that material, depending on it. So just, don't just erase all Post-it notes. See what's written on there, see if it's important. If it is, leave it. But don't put Post-it notes on things. Newspapers. So newspapers are not made to last. They're printed on paper that is supposed to be disposable. And so you should remove the newspaper clippings from your paper objects. This can also be time consuming. And if you know where your newspaper clippings are, it's the easiest. You can remove them and put them all in a folder together. Newspaper also stains paper. And if you have clippings, it stains it in like the shape of the clipping, which is kind of funny, but it also stains the paper. So you can still read the paper usually, but it just looks yellow now. Some archives, you can also scan the newspaper clippings because then they're preserved a little bit better. Some archives like to scan and digitize all their newspapers and newspaper clippings, and then they destroy the originals. Not every archive likes to do that because they don't want to destroy the originals. Instead, they just kind of throw them all in a box together. So at least they're maintained, but you also have another copy of them. And then transitioning into digitizing materials. So archives don't digitize everything, just like they don't collect everything. Usually they digitize materials that are degrading or important materials. If you, in your college, if you have documents that detail like the founding of the college and some of the early things about the college starting, you should definitely digitize those. If you have a researcher wanting information and you scan it in for them to send it through an email, then you already have it, you have it digitized, so you can save a copy of that. Some archives have multiple copies of digitized materials, and they have one for like researcher use, so they send that copy to the researchers and the other copy stays somewhere else. And then talking about digitizing, so once you digitize something and you save it on your computer, it doesn't last forever. There is a thing called bit rot, and the easiest way to prevent that is to talk to your IT department and ask them if they do backups of the materials that you have, depending on where your files are. Make sure they do backups of it. Make sure they're moving the objects around so they don't have bit rot. But it's easier if you just talk to IT about it because they're the ones who usually know about it. If you're really low on resources, you don't have the greatest IT department, you can always like back them up on external hard drives, which you can do anyway. But the external hard drives also have bit rot occur, and so you need to make sure that you sometimes like back up everything on it and not just back it up once and think it's okay. So with backups, the rule of thumb is usually 3 backups. It's 2 on-site, 1 off-site. Off-site can be in the cloud. It can be which is usually on a server. A lot of people like even doing like backups where it's like one's on the West Coast and one's on the East Coast, because like if the East Coast gets hit by a hurricane and that building gets destroyed and the server is destroyed where your backup is, at least we have the West Coast backup. I've heard of some people doing backups on external hard drives and then taking those home with them, so it's at least off-site. So if your college burns down randomly, which it shouldn't hopefully, at least you have a backup of something. The other thing to be aware of with digital objects is technology changing. So, you know, back in the early 2000s, we were still using floppy disk drives. We're not anymore. No computers I've seen come with them. And so getting materials off those, digitizing VHS tapes, if you can is useful. Because like I have a VCR player at home, but I don't know if it works anymore because I haven't used it in a long time. So never assume that any device is safe. Just always be aware of those digital objects. So then you make sure you preserve everything. So I'm just going to briefly touch on born digital objects. This could be an entire webinar within itself. It can get very, very complicated very easily. So born digital objects can be almost anything that you produce only digitally. So it could be emails, it could be Word documents that you created and then sent to someone, or you just created. It could be Moraine Valley, we have the born digital objects that are the Board of Trustees minutes. They're sent to me digitally. I don't ever print them out. They're just saved digitally. And preserving those are similar to the digitized items. Some corporations have something called digital asset management system, which is like a catalog for digital objects, and it helps preserve those, and you can add metadata to them and you can search it, and it's pretty useful, but it's also expensive because it's a thing you have to purchase. Yeah, with the born digital objects, if you're looking for more information about that, I suggest going to the Society of American Archivists website. They do have an education tab, which they do have information about a lot of different things on there. And so I would just take a look around because born digital objects get a little technical. Another thing I'm going to mention is if you don't have enough staff and you have extra money laying around, you can always hire an archival consultant. I'm going to give you a link that the Society of American Archivists has. They have a list of archival consultants that sent them their information, and usually there are 2 in Illinois that I found. They have websites that you can go to see what they do. I do not know their rates, but they can come in and organize your information for you, but they do cost money. So depending on where you're at, you can always look into that. And so here are my resources I'm going to give you. They're all on the Society of American Archivists website. The first one is just an overview of archives. You don't have to read through everything, but it's a good resource. And then the guidelines for college and university archives, again, nothing ever is set in stone, but if you're really struggling for things, you can go there. And then the archival consultants. So that is all that I have. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and then see if you guys have any questions. All right, so if you have any questions, you can type in the chat, or you can, if you have your mic open, you can always ask it that way. While we wait, I got some questions from a fellow member of the Professional Development Committee. And I'm just gonna go over a couple of them that are important while anyone is typing if they have any questions. So the first one is, we are struggling with maintaining personnel and resources are shrinking by the day. How do we convince the powers that be that investing in archives is a worthwhile endeavor? So this goes into advocacy, which all archives have to deal with, and it takes a while. I keep referencing it, but Society of American Archivists website has an advocacy tab, and it goes into a lot of different things about, has resources about public awareness and policies and stuff, but trying to make sure you get across the point that like your archive is there to preserve the history of the college. And usually people care about archives when like an anniversary comes up, which if you don't already have an archive there, it's hard to just kind of put things together for it. But talking to different departments about transferring their documents to your archive and what it does, and that like their documents will be preserved, and that if they need lists of things, you can help them with that. Recently, I got an acquisition at Moraine Valley of athletics documents, and after I go through the processing of those materials. I will be making some lists. They have a Hall of Fame inductees every year now. And so I will be getting information about those people, and then also working with the athletics department eventually to have displays talking about the history of athletics. So kind of trying to figure out ways of getting departments involved in their own history and the college's history about why you're important. And also, archives aren't always about the past. Most archives, all archives should be trying to preserve the present. So for example, back in 2016, when there was the Women's March in Chicago, the Newberry Library, that's downtown Chicago, that's a big research library, collected and is preserving a bunch of the posters that were left from that march. And so they are preserving the history of that march as it happens, because it's easier to get things while they occur than it does like even a year after the fact. Especially, you might have people leave your college, come back to your college. It's hard to find the same people there sometimes. So advocacy is something that archives struggle with, but it's a constant conversation, talking to people about it. Let's see here. Another one's about born digital objects, which I kind of went over. And then what's the best, cheapest, easiest, quickest way to digitize materials, especially without damaging them? There are companies that will mass digitize objects for you. You need to definitely look into seeing what they are, what their prices are, and then also like how they do it. They can mass digitize items for you, but it also might be like breaking apart, unbinding booklets, and then digitizing them that way. Buying a good scanner is probably the easiest way, maybe not the cheapest, but it does take time. So Kaylin has a question. What are some ways to maintain a good environment when you don't have much control over the temperature or humidity? If you can find a room that's cold, it's probably the best. If you can get a temperature gauge, which there are archival temperature gauges, but if you just get any of them that have a temperature, humidity, putting them in different rooms to see how it's maintained. As long as you try to maintain it at a certain level, yeah, it's hard if you don't have a lot of control over it. I was lucky in Marine Valley that we found a room that was cold. It maintains it pretty well. The humidity is a bit high, but if you at least find some room in the basement that's dark, maybe, that's my suggestion. It's kind of trying to grasp at whatever you can. That's why I definitely suggest getting acid-free folders for your materials, because without a good environment, that's the safest way to preserve your items. Okay, Russell has a question. Digital. You have a lot of photographs, and we're trying to find the best way to store digitally. Our college has its own Google. What do you think about storing them on Google Photo in the drive? Oh, yes, Google Sheets, yes. That's actually a great idea. So storing them digitally can be a little weird. I know at Marine Valley, we store them in a file folder on our computer network, and when you open them, they're just in like the Windows photo viewer. So they're just saved as like JPEGs. But storing them on Google Photo would be great, because Google Drive has backups it creates. And if you ever lose them, you can always get the backups that way. I don't know how that is on Space though, but I'm assuming if you have things on Google Drive that you probably have the space for it. But with photographs, you definitely want to make sure that you are organizing them well. Photos can be a little weird with organization, and then just making sure you can find them. So if you need to title them, if you need to put them in their groupings by department, and then just entitle them that way, that's probably the easiest way to find them. Photos can be a little weird sometimes, but yeah, no problem. Do we have any other questions? Do you want me to put in the resources in the chat so then you can click on them easier? I might just go ahead and do that. Just 1 second. All right. All right, so there is the overview. And then I'm going to do the guidelines. And these aren't the only things to look at on this website. It can be a little, if you're looking for more education for archives, they have an education, yeah, it's called education. They have continuing education, and then they have certificate programs that they do themselves. And then they have, they talk about graduate archival education. So there's, so I went to Dominican University up here in River Forest, and they have a like archival certificate you can get, which, okay, the last one I did was a consultant's, which has you take certain classes. So depending on what you're wanting to do, you can either take certain classes from different graduate programs. There's some online. Society of American Archivists also has online learning that you can do. They have in person, and then they also have like webinars you can watch. They do cost money. If you have someone who really, if you really want to learn more about it and you're doing some more continuing education, Society of American Archivists also does an annual convention, kind of like, or conference, kind of like ALA does. And in 2020, it's going to be in Chicago. So if you're in the States or you're near Chicago, definitely look into it. It does cost a bit of money to go, but it's a week and you can go to sessions that are all about archives and kind of get into the profession a little bit more. But this site also has like what are archives, helping with donating organizational records, copyright, unpublished materials. So it gives you a lot of information about archives. It can get a little technical with the jargon, but there is a dictionary. I just don't remember what it's under. There's a thesaurus for use there's a under publications, glossary of archival and records terminology. So that goes over, like, if you see a word you don't understand, just go there. It's in alphabetical order. You can click on it and then read what that word means. So you can start learning the jargon. They do also have a bookstore. Archival Fundamental series is a great series to read. It can get, it's very textbooky sounding. Some of the books are, the preservation book is very technical with the paper, but it's a good place to start. And they do cost money. So a lot of these things do cost money, but are good places to start. So does anyone have any more questions or concerns? Here is my email. I hope that's showing up correctly. All looks like the same thing to me. It's Katie Cheever at triton.edu if it didn't show up correctly. So if you have any questions, you can always email me about anything. So. All right. I think that was all I was going to talk about. So if we don't have any more questions, we can just go ahead and end it early.
You're welcome.
Katie, I want to thank you for this presentation. I think in a week I will find out that I will be in charge of the records for my local government unit. And your presentation today will be a great help.
Nice. Yeah, different archives do things slightly differently too, but it's at least a good basis.
Yes, I'm afraid that it's going to be a huge job.
Yeah, just one step at a time. That's what I think. Just one step at a time, and you'll get to it. So.
I do know that I won't have to keep most of the records forever. I'm trying to figure out if paper is the best way to go.
Yeah, that's a big decision.
I don't think I'm this